The Zorvith Dominion had seen countless worlds fall before them. Their empire, built upon genetic superiority and martial dominance, prided itself on engineering apex predators that made the strongest native species of lesser planets obsolete. To them, humanity was an amusing anomaly, upright primates wielding crude technology, nothing more. The capture of an Earth reconnaissance team had only confirmed their arrogance. Captain Marcus Grim Grayson sat on the cold metal floor of a containment cell, his fingers tracing the faint grooves in his combat boots. Around him, the rest of his unit was engaged in silent contemplation, each man processing their capture in his own way. Doc Washington leaned against the wall, absently rubbing the scar on his temple. Gonzo Gonzalez, restless as always, paced like a caged animal. Lieutenant Mitchell sat cross-legged, eyes closed, muttering calculations under his breath, no doubt analyzing the alien technology they had glimpsed on their way in. And Carter, the scientist, the only one of them who hadn't spent his life in war, examined their captors with a quiet intensity, memorizing everything. Beyond the thick, translucent barrier that separated them from the rest of the facility, a Zorvith warden observed them with an expression bordering on amusement. The creature's elongated face and ridged skull gave it the appearance of a predatory bird, and its dark, reflective eyes betrayed none of its thoughts. When it finally spoke, its voice was a blend of guttural clicks and synthetic modulation. "Earthlings, you will provide entertainment." No one reacted. Silence was the only defiance they had left, for now. The warden turned, gesturing toward the chamber beyond the cell. A vast arena sprawled before them, metallic walls lined with observation decks where other Zorvith watched from their elevated positions. The ground was a mixture of smooth plating and patches of simulated terrain, all designed for one purpose: bloodsport. In the center of the arena, an enormous holding cage rattled as something massive and impatient stirred inside. "Our hunters are supreme," the warden continued. "Your world's creatures are amusingly primitive. We wish to demonstrate this, and you will watch." Gonzo exhaled sharply. "They're gonna pit some poor animal against whatever nightmare they cooked up, huh? Testing their engineered war beasts," Carter muttered, eyes locked on the enclosure. "They think our wildlife is weak." "I'd bet my life they're wrong." "You just might," Grim murmured. The warden gestured again, and a mechanical arm extended over the arena, lowering a smaller containment pod to the ground. The door slid open with a sharp hiss, and a squat, black-furred creature slunk out into the light. Gonzo blinked. "You gotta be kidding me." Even Grim felt the corners of his lips twitch in something that wasn't quite amusement. A honey badger. The Zorvith warden chittered in satisfaction. A pathetic specimen. A true testament to Earth's inferiority. Carter chuckled, the first real sound from their cell in hours. They have no idea. Across the arena, the heavy enclosure's door groaned open, and from its depths, the Zorvith's prized predator emerged. It was a grotesque amalgamation of engineered efficiency, sleek, reptilian musculature beneath scaled plating, elongated talons that dripped with neurotoxic resin, and a head shaped like an obsidian wedge, gleaming under the artificial lights. It moved with a calculated grace, its tail slashing the air in lazy arcs. The Zorvith in the stands let out approving murmurs. The honey badger yawned. Then, without hesitation, it ambled toward the predator as though it were no more than a minor inconvenience. Gonzo leaned closer. "Come on, little dude. Make me proud." The war beast struck first, lunging with terrifying speed. The honey badger barely moved. The massive jaws clamped around its midsection, lifting it clear off the ground. The Zorvith laughed. Then the badger twisted, its compact body wrenched free from the predator's grip in an unnatural contortion, its dense fur rendering the bite ineffective. Before the creature could react, the honey badger latched onto its snout, claws sinking into flesh. The predator roared, thrashing wildly, but the badger clung tight, tearing into the soft tissue of its face with relentless efficiency. The laughter in the stands turned to murmurs of confusion. The war beast slammed the badger into the ground once, twice. Bones cracked. It should have been fatal. It wasn't. The honey badger was still moving. Doc exhaled. That thing doesn't know how to quit. The predator, visibly shaken, backed away. The honey badger dragged itself to its feet, bloodied but unbroken. It charged again. This time, it went for the throat. What followed was brutal, relentless, and horrifyingly one-sided. The predator tried to fight, but the badger didn't stop. It didn't hesitate. It tore, clawed, and bit with an unyielding savagery that defied logic. When the war beast finally collapsed, gasping and twitching in its own blood, the honey badger stood over it, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Then, for good measure, it sank its teeth into the creature's exposed neck and held on. The arena was silent. Carter turned to the warden, his expression neutral. Pathetic specimen, huh? The Zorvith's amusement was gone. Its jaw tightened, the smooth folds of its face pulling into an expression that might have been uncertainty. Then the badger collapsed. It had fought until there was nothing left in its body to give. Doc pressed a hand against the glass. Hell of a way to go. But Carter wasn't watching the badger anymore. He was watching the Zorvith, watching the unease creeping into their posture. They had never seen something that refused to die. Grim took a slow breath. They think they understand predators, but they don't understand what it means to fight when the fight should already be lost. Mitchell cracked his knuckles. Then let's show 'em. Grim nodded. Their time would come. For now, they waited, and the Zorvith watched them with something that, for the first time, might have been fear. The Zorvith did not acknowledge fear, not in the way humans did. They viewed emotions as tools: pride, dominance, amusement. Fear had no place in their philosophy. And yet, something about that fight had unsettled them. The humans could see it in their rigid posture, in the way they avoided meeting their gaze. The honey badger was dead, but its defiance lingered in the air like a ghost. Grim sat motionless in the cell, letting the silence stretch. The others had settled into their own patterns. Mitchell had taken to studying the magnetic locks on the door. Gonzo tapped restless fingers against his knee, occasionally muttering to himself in Spanish. Doc watched the guards with the patience of a surgeon, and Carter, as always, was thinking. "They're not bringing in another test subject," Carter said finally. They should have by now. Grim didn't need to ask why. The honey badger had forced them to reassess their assumptions, and that meant delays. The Dominion's whole identity was built on superiority. A species that wouldn't break, even in death, was a problem they didn't know how to solve. "They're watching us closer," Doc murmured. "They want to see if we're anything like it." Gonzo grinned. "Joke's on them." Mitchell exhaled through his nose. "Damn straight. We're worse." The corridor lights dimmed, a shift in power cycling through the facility. A lone guard stepped past their cell, a different one from before. Young, by Zorvith standards. His posture was tense, his fingers flexing against the pulse rifle slung across his back. He hesitated a fraction of a second too long before moving on. "They're nervous," Carter observed. Grim leaned forward. Before Carter could respond, a mechanical hiss filled the room. The outer door to the holding block slid open, and the warden strode in, its posture returning to its usual arrogance. If the honey badger had shaken them, they were doing their best to pretend otherwise. "You will be moved," it announced. "The Dominion wishes to study your resilience more closely." Gonzo snorted. "Resilience, that what you call it?" The warden ignored him. "You will comply." Grim stood first. His men followed. None of them needed words. They knew what this was, an opportunity. The escort consisted of 6 guards, armed and cautious. The route took them through a series of sterile corridors, past towering enclosures filled with bioengineer horrors, some dormant, others twitching in restless agitation. The Dominion had built its empire on these things, creatures bred for war and extermination. And yet, the humans were still here. They approached a security checkpoint. Grim met Carter's gaze, and the scientist gave the smallest nod. This was the spot. Mitchell moved first. He stumbled, feigning weakness, his shoulder knocking into one of the guards. The Zorvith reacted instinctively, shoving him back. That moment of distraction was all they needed. Gonzo struck low, wrenching a rifle from the nearest guard. Doc drove an elbow into the throat of another. Carter was faster than he looked, twisting out of reach and driving his knee into an exposed joint. Grim took the warden himself, slamming his head forward into the alien's skull ridge. The impact sent a sharp jolt through his own forehead, but the warden staggered. That was enough. Mitchell, now armed, turned his weapon on the remaining guards. The firefight lasted seconds. Plasma fire, the hiss of burning air, bodies dropping. Then it was over. Gonzo exhaled, cracking his knuckles. "Been waiting for that." "No alarms," Carter noted. "They weren't expecting it here. We've got a window." Grim picked up a fallen rifle, checking its charge. "Then, let's move." The facility was massive, a labyrinth of steel and artificial light. They moved fast, keeping low, taking out lone guards before alarms could be raised. Carter led them through maintenance tunnels, navigating by instinct and stolen data from a guard's wrist console. They reached an auxiliary storage bay, stocked with weapons and armor, alien designs, but adaptable. Mitchell grabbed a set of gauntlets, flexing his fingers. "These got kinetic dampeners. Could be useful." "Take what we can carry," Grim ordered. "Move fast." Gonzo grabbed a belt of explosives, whistling. "Now this is a care package." A distant klaxon blared. The Dominion had caught up. Grim motioned toward the exit. "Time's up." They pushed forward, gunfire ripping through corridors, moving like a single organism, calculated, relentless. The Zorvith had numbers, but they were used to overwhelming force, not tactical precision. The humans were faster, meaner, more unpredictable. They reached an engineering deck overlooking the central power core. Mitchell grinned. "That looks important." Gonzo was already setting charges. "You know it." The facility shuddered as the first explosion detonated, lights flickering. Grim knew they couldn't take the whole place down, but they could cripple it, disorient the Zorvith. Buy time. A sound echoed behind them, a guttural snarl. Grim turned. It shouldn't have been alive. The honey badger, broken, bleeding, but standing. It had been left for dead, discarded, forgotten. But it refused to die. And it wasn't alone. A security breach had opened containment cells. Other creatures, the Dominion's own war beasts, were loose, snarling in confusion. The honey badger stood among them, bloodied but defiant. The Zorvith would never understand it, but Grim did. It wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance. Grim nodded. Time to go. As the alarms howled and chaos erupted, they disappeared into the dark. The station burned. Explosions rippled through its skeletal corridors, emergency shutters sealing off compromised sections while the Dominion scrambled to regain control. Fires raged in the lower decks where fuel lines had ruptured, filling the air with acrid smoke. The humans moved through the chaos like phantoms, slipping between shadows, taking down stragglers before they could sound alarms. They had momentum now, and Grim intended to use it. Gonzo checked his rifle's charge, shaking his head. Running low? We all are, Mitchell muttered. Gotta make M count. Carter crouched beside a dead Zorvith, prying open the wrist console embedded in its forearm. His fingers moved quickly, bypassing security protocols with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent his life breaking things meant to be unbreakable. A small holographic display flickered to life, streaming real-time data of the station's internal systems. They're sealing off escape routes, he murmured. Most hangars are locked down, but his eyes flicked to Grim. There's a ship in Auxiliary Dock 6. Unsecured. Looks like it's being prepped for emergency departure. Whose ship? Grim asked. Carter smirked. Ours now. Doc wiped sweat from his brow. How far? Other side of the station. Grim exhaled sharply. Then we better get moving. They navigated the chaos with ruthless efficiency. Zorvith squads moved in coordinated sweeps, but they weren't used to enemies that thought like humans did. The Dominion had built its empire on brute force, not adaptability. The humans didn't fight fair. Mitchell dropped behind cover, sighting down a corridor. Squad ahead. Heavy armor. Grim signaled. Flank M. Gonzo took the left passage, silent as a wraith. Doc followed, covering their 6. The moment the enemy squad passed the intersection, the ambush hit. A burst of suppressed fire took the lead soldier in the throat. Before the others could react, Mitchell lobbed an ion grenade into their midst, detonating with a sharp crack. The squad collapsed in a tangle of limbs, armor shorting out. Grim finished the last with a single shot. No wasted movement. No hesitation. They pressed forward. The Dominion's war beasts had fully escaped containment by now. The Zorvith had tried to wipe them out before they became a problem, but they had underestimated their own creations. Hulking creatures stalked the corridors, twisted hybrids of scaled muscle and reinforced bone. Some were locked in battles with security teams. Others moved with terrifying purpose, hunting. The station had turned into a feeding ground. And then there was the honey badger. It should have been dead. It wasn't. It moved through the wreckage with the same stubborn ferocity that had made a legend in the first place. Blood matted its fur, burns scorched its back, but it didn't stop. The Zorvith had mocked Earth's predators, yet here it was, proving them wrong with every step. Mitchell shook his head in disbelief. That thing's got no quit in it. Doc grinned. Starting to feel like we should take it with us. Carter didn't laugh. We're not leaving without it. Gonzo whistled. Man's got a soft spot. They reached the outer ring of the station, where observation panels stretched along the hull, showing the abyss of space beyond. The auxiliary dock was close. Carter had managed to keep their presence from triggering a full lockdown, but it wouldn't last. Grim stopped short. Hold. The path to the dock was blocked. Not by Zorvith. By something worse. A beast stood between them and escape. Taller than a man, its frame corded with thick sinew beneath armor-plated scales. For eyes gleamed like burning coals. A ridged tail scraped the floor, dripping venom. The Dominion's finest creation. Mitchell exhaled. That's a problem. Gonzo shrugged. We've handled worse. Grim didn't answer. His mind worked through options, but they all ended the same way. Something had to distract it long enough for the others to get through. Before he could give the order, the honey badger moved. It limped forward, dragging itself past them, breathing ragged. The war beast snarled, baring jagged fangs. The badger didn't flinch. Carter tensed. We need to. Grim held up a hand. Let go. The badger locked eyes with the monster. Then it attacked. It shouldn't have stood a chance. And yet, the war beast struck first, claws raking down, fast as a blade. The badger dodged, but not entirely. Deep gashes tore through its side. It barely reacted. Instead, it lunged, sinking its teeth into the creature's leg, holding on with terrifying strength. The beast roared, shaking it loose, but the badger came back. Again and again. It clawed at exposed flesh, bit at joints, attacked with a desperation that didn't care about survival. It only cared about hurting the thing in front of it. And it was working. The monster staggered. It had never encountered something that ignored pain. Gonzo's voice was quiet. Goddamn. Grim seized the moment. Move. They sprinted past, weapons raised in case the thing turned on them. But it didn't. It was too focused on its impossible opponent. The dock doors loomed ahead. Carter activated the control panel, overriding security. The ship was there, sleek and unfamiliar, but functional. Mitchell prepped the engines. Time to go. But Carter hesitated. He looked back. The honey badger was still fighting, still refusing to die. Doc placed a hand on his shoulder. Carter. The badger tore at the war beast's throat. The creature finally collapsed, shuddering. The badger swayed. Then it fell. The Dominion's experiment had failed. The proof lay in the motionless body of the smallest warrior on the battlefield. Carter swallowed hard. Then he turned and boarded the ship. Grim took the pilot's seat. The hangar shields dropped. The ship lifted free of its moorings. As they rocketed into the void, the last thing Carter saw was the Dominion's burning station shrinking behind them. Mitchell exhaled. Didn't think we'd make it. Gonzo smirked. Wasn't worried. Doc chuckled. Liar. Grim kept his eyes on the stars. They weren't finished yet. The Dominion had made a mistake. It wasn't the first, but it was the kind of mistake that couldn't be undone. It wasn't underestimating humanity's resilience. That was a given. It wasn't even assuming that superior firepower meant assured victory. No, their greatest mistake was assuming humans would let this go. Grim sat at the helm, eyes fixed on the void stretching endlessly before them. The ship's stolen controls hummed beneath his fingers. The Dominion's technology, smoother than anything built by human hands. It didn't matter. They'd make it there soon enough. The crew moved behind him, efficient, quiet, men shaped by war and necessity. How bad's the pursuit? Mitchell asked, glancing toward Carter, who was busy running calculations on a flickering console. They'll catch up, Carter admitted. But not before we reach the jump point. Their ships are faster, but they still have to mobilize. They weren't expecting us to steal one of their own. Gonzo chuckled, checking the rifle in his lap. They weren't expecting a lot of things today. Doc was silent, leaning against the bulkhead. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, only the distant, thoughtful look of a man who had seen too many battles end the same way. His hands moved methodically, tending to a wound on his arm, but Grim knew his thoughts were elsewhere. We're not done, Grim said. The others looked up. The station's burning, Carter said carefully. We hit them hard, took one of their best ships, and their whole experiment's a failure. They won't admit it. Grimm said. "They'll bury the truth before they let their empire think we broke them. But we did. We showed them their own war beasts can bleed. And we showed them something worse." Doc exhaled. "That we don't break." Mitchell shook his head. "Damn shame about the badger, though. Mean little bastard." The memory hung between them. The way it had refused to die, not just once, but twice. Not for survival, not for instinct, but for something else. A need to fight, even when there was nothing left to win. Gonzo tapped the side of his helmet. "Kind of feels wrong, you know, that we just left it." Carter didn't speak. His fingers hovered over the console, hesitating. Then he sighed. "I pulled something from the Dominion's files before we left. Just couldn't help myself." Grimm turned in his seat. "What kind of something?" Carter adjusted the display. A grainy feed flickered to life. A camera inside the station. Broken, glitching. Fire raged in the background. Dominion soldiers rushing through the wreckage. Bodies lay scattered. Some human, most not. And then movement. The feed stuttered, lines of static crawling across the image. But it was there, small, bloody, still alive. The honey badger. Doc sat up. No way. The image cut out. A final glitch. Then black. Carter leaned back. No way of knowing if it actually made it off that station. Dominion protocols to wipe any trace of failures. But if it's anything like us, it's alive. Grimm finished. Silence settled between them. Not the kind born of uncertainty, but the kind before a decision was made. Mitchell cracked his knuckles. "We going back for it?" Gonzo grinned. "Damn, right we are." Carter smiled, just a little. Grimm turned his gaze back to the stars. The Dominion would be coming for them. That was inevitable. But they had something the Dominion would never understand. A reason to fight. And a lesson to teach. Never underestimate the things that refuse to die.